Now, one more very small concept but very important concept is the concept of a hope spot. Now, when we talk about hope spot, what exactly are they? If you go back to when we were discussing about hotspots, we discussed one significant criticism. And this criticism was that we do not take marine environment into picture. The marine ecosystems are untouched by the hotspots around the world. This is where this particular concept of hope spots comes into picture, because these are special places that are critical to the health of the ocean. Now, this is a very new concept. Until 2009, this was not even introduced. And it was Dr. Sylvia Earle who was the one to introduce this concept in one of her TED Talks. She is a very well known oceanographer and she has been studying oceans all her life. So, all the issues that she saw with respect to oceans and how we need to take care of the oceans, this is how she came up with the theory of hope spots. So, this is what we know. Now, they are often the areas that need new protection, but they can also be existing MPAs. MPAs are basically marine protected areas, similar to what you also have on the land. So, why these concepts become important? If you look at land and the conservation areas that we have taken, we discussed and we have been looking at this figure again and again, that 2.4% of the entire land area has been classified as hotspots. Apart from that, if you take the wildlife sanctuaries, other protected areas like national parks, biosphere reserves, etc., in that case, you'll see that approximately 12% of the entire land has been under protected area. But at the same time, if you look at the ocean, then the kinds of protected areas that have been defined until now, they are not more than 6%. So there's a huge gap. We are talking about 6% of such a huge expanse and 12% of land being under protected areas. So that's why this is something that needs to be taken up. That's why this is a concept that comes and takes the center stage. So why do they provide the hope? Why are these areas being said to be hope spots? Special abundance or diversity of species, unusual representative species, ecosystems are present. Then particular population of rare, threatened or endemic species are present. A site with potential to reverse the damage for negative human impact. Reverse the damage from negative human impact is present in these areas. The presence of natural processes such as major migration corridors or spawning grounds. Then significant historical, cultural or spiritual values. Particular economic importance to the community has been given. And then the idea that anyone can nominate a site special to them, a site that gives them hope, is also one of the criteria that has been let down here. So if you look at this figure, you will understand where these hope spots are situated. So if you look in case of India, you will see that we have the Lakshadweep Islands and we have the Andaman Islands, which have been listed as a part of hope spots. So if you look at all the blue dots that you have here, these are the ones which originally were proposed, and after that all these red dots that you see all across the world, these are the ones which are new hope spots. So just remember these few points. One very key point about hope spots is also about the main organization which is looking after the concept, and this is basically called as Mission Blue. Just remember the name Mission Blue, which is associated with Hopespots concept. So what is the concept? What is the agency? That's it. You don't need to know much about here. So this is what we mean by Hopespots. Now let's move to our next topic, and this is a very, very important topic which becomes important from your prelims, from your mains point of view, as well as from the point of view of the fact that you are going to be decision makers in future. So you need to understand the meaning of extinction, and then only we can come to conservation of biodiversity and what are the steps and why conservation is required. So first of all, when we talk about this word extinction, this is a word that you have a fair idea about. You know what is the meaning of extinction. Whenever you see that there is a species that has been wiped out from the surface of the earth, probably you can call it as extinction. But if we go by definition, we would probably call something as being extinct if there is no reasonable doubt this or the last individual of a given species has completely vanished from this face of the earth. So when we talk about extinction, let me start with a case study. Let me start with the situation that we have seen with the amphibians. What are amphibians? You know that amphibians are species which can live on land and can live underwater as well. They have a moist skin, they can breathe through their skin, and these are certain properties. So they will need water, moisture, and they can live on land as well. So common examples are frogs, toads, salamanders. So all these can be seen as prominent examples of amphibians. Now what has been observed is, and especially in the last 30-40 odd years, that there has been a significant reduction in the total population of amphibians. And this has been observed across species. It has been observed in the frogs, in the toads, and it has been seen in salamanders and other species of amphibians as well. So scientists have not been able to look at and understand the basic reason behind why it is happening, but many of the scientists and researchers believe that it is something that is happening because of many reasons, and we have to understand all these reasons as well. But to start with, when we talk about amphibians, what has been observed is there has been a drastic decline in their population. One of the reports says that more than 41% of all the species of amphibians are threatened with extinction, and there is a huge chance that they will go extinct. So why are these amphibians important? Because if you go back to history, you will see that amphibians were one of the first species which started to come on land. We all know, and we had a discussion on this also, that life on the earth originated underwater, and after that, from there we saw that there was drastic change in the way they started to live, and then there were many of the species that migrated to land. Amphibians were among the earliest ones to do so. Not only this, what we have also observed is that they have been able to survive very effectively against the environmental changes that have happened over millions of years. So in that manner, we know that the properties that they have, the survival instincts that they have it better as compared to most of the other individuals, most of the other species. So these are some of the things that make it a very special species. Now, with all these given facts, it becomes important for us to understand why are we bothering about the amphibians. Why is it important for us to study the decline in population that is being seen and observed in the amphibians? So first of all, you have to understand that when we talk about these amphibians, or let's take frog as a sample, so we see that frogs or amphibians are kind of an indicator species. They are very good indicators of what kind of changes are happening in the environment, because they are very sensitive to the changes that have been happening. For example, we talked about the fact that they breathe through their skin, and if they are living in polluted water, then in that case their survival starts to get hindered. There will be a chance that they will start to die off. Then, because of the fact that they have a moist skin, they have a transparent skin, they have a porous skin, because of which what can also happen is, if they get affected by parasites, they will die off very quickly. So pollution can be a major factor, parasites can be a major factor, because they have a porous skin. Now, so they are very sensitive. So if they are dying off, it means that there is something wrong with the environment or the habitat where they are living. So that's one. Then apart from that, what we also know is that they play a very big role in the food web. They consume a lot of insects. So to maintain the biological diversity, to maintain the balance of the ecosystem, they are very, very important species. So that becomes the second reason. Third reason is that they have huge role to play when it comes to medicines, when it comes to the pharmaceuticals. You will see that a lot of amphibian species are used for the medicinal purposes in one way or the other. So these three become very strong reasons for us to understand why the amphibians are declining in population and what we need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen. So these things need to be understood. Now, at the same time, when we talk about the reasons why this has been happening, the scientists have come out with a lot of reasons. And what has been observed and what has been stated by many of the scientists is that one reason or the other is not alone responsible for this kind of decline, but rather it's a complete combination of all these kind of reasons that we have. What are these reasons? First, we can talk about some of the reasons like parasites. Once the parasites start to affect the amphibians, or let's say frogs, salamanders, etc., in that case it will be very difficult for them to survive because they have a porous skin, and that's why parasites will be able to affect them very easily. That becomes one very big problem. After that, you have water pollution. Water pollution also has a very big role to play in the disappearance of all the amphibians that we are looking at. Then, diseases. There was a good case study that was conducted, and this happened in the Central American region, where all of a sudden we saw that a lot of frogs were starting to die. So when the researchers went there and they started to look at the reasons, one of the strong reasons that they saw was the presence of cited fungus. This cited fungus was one which was affecting the skin, and because it was affecting the skin, it was blocking the breathing through air, and because of that, what started to happen was these frogs started to get dehydrated and they started to die off. So they died in large populations in the Central American regions because of this cited fungus. So disease becomes very important factor. Then after that, another factor that you have is habitat loss and fragmentation. We'll have a greater discussion on this factor when we come to biodiversity conservation. But you have to understand that when we talk about habitat loss and fragmentation with respect to frogs or amphibians, we are talking about wetlands, and especially freshwater wetlands where many of these species are found. So we know that the land is drying up. We are using and we are diverging a lot of such wetlands to real estate. And because of that also we look at a kind of habitat loss and fragmentation for these amphibians. So that becomes another very strong reason. Then after that, higher amount of ultraviolet light because of the ozone layer depletion, and we have to talk about ozone layer depletion separately in upcoming chapter. But we know that because of ozone layer depletion, a lot of harmful rays or the ultraviolet rays that would have been stopped by the ozone layer is not being stopped anymore. Why? Because the layer has become thinner, and as well as we have seen that there is a concept of something called as ozone hole, because of which a lot of ultraviolet radiation is coming directly to the surface of the earth. And since they have a very sensitive skin and they have a skin which is porous, ultraviolet light being there in higher amount makes it very, very difficult for them to survive. After that, one more reason that has been seen is the introduction of non-native species. So many a times, either naturally or because of human intervention, we see that some non-native species starts to come in a region, and because of these non-native species, we see that there is a kind of difference that comes to that habitat, that given habitat or the ecosystem, and that also becomes a big reason for many of the frogs, other amphibians to disappear. Then after that, there's one more that has been seen, and that is the leg meat of frog. In many of the Eastern Asian countries like China, etc., the leg meat of a frog is very popular. And that also has been one of the reasons why huge amount of killing and hunting has been happening. So we are talking about overhunting of the frog species. So this has been happening especially in the eastern region of Asia. So these are some of the reasons that have been stated by many of the scientists that could have been leading to the decline in population that we have been looking at. Just if we talk about the frogs, since 1970, what we have observed is that more than 200 species of just frogs have vanished. So this has been a hugely upsetting trend, and this has been seen in all the amphibians in the world. So that's why this has become one area of concern. So this is just about amphibians and just a case study, and because amphibians especially have been in a lot of news as compared to many of the other species, because the dying off rate in amphibians that has been observed has been much higher as compared to many of the other species. So that's why a good discussion to have on amphibians becomes important. It can be something that can be asked directly also in the examinations, because a lot of news articles also came with respect to this particular topic. Apart from that, when we talk about extinction, if we know that there is a species that has vanished from the earth, or there is no reasonable doubt that it has already seen its last individual, then in that case we can say that it has become extinct. For example, if we talk about India, There are two species that you see on your screens. One that you see, this one is Himalayan quail, and the second one that you see is a pink-headed duck. Now, why these two species? When you talk about the Himalayan quail, although if you go by the definition given in IUCN, we'll talk about what is IUCN, but you just need to know this for now, that IUCN gives you the list of species according to what their status is. For example, which are the species which have gone extinct, which are the species which are threatened, which are the species where we don't need to have a concern about. So these are the kinds of things that IUCN does. We'll have a discussion on it. But according to IUCN, when you look at these two species have been listed as critically endangered. They have been listed as critically endangered, meaning they are highly threatened and they might go extinct very soon. But if you just talk on facts, if we talk about raw facts, last time Himalayan quail was seen in India was in 1876. 1876. We are talking about 150 years since last time we spotted a Himalayan quail. But the efforts are still going on. For example, if you look at the website of World Wildlife Fund India, you'll see that they still have some campaigns being run in the state of, for example, Uttarakhand, where there are posters which are being distributed so that if the locals have observed any of the Himalayan quails, they can identify them and they can tell the government agencies about the same. But 1876, 150 years, chances are it is already extinct. We are just living in denial. Then the same goes for pink-headed duck also. Last time it was observed was in 1949. And since 1949, pink-headed duck has not been observed. But still it has just been named as critically endangered and still hasn't been classified as extinct. So many of these species, these are just two species examples that I have in front of you. But there are hundreds of such examples where the species has not been observed for more than 50 years or so. But still they have not been labeled as extinct. So what has been observed is that a lot of extinctions have happened, a lot of extinctions are happening, but still since we have a ray of hope, we look at the things in that manner and we hope that maybe in future we'll find some species, some individuals which are still living, and probably that will help in breeding the same species again. Now, when we talk about extinction, so first of all, you have to understand why this comes up. And there are two concepts that always play a role in tandem, and these are speciation and extinction. So when we talk about extinction, we already have established it that it is disappearance of species. When you talk about speciation, this becomes a very important term to understand. We are talking about adding of species. So to maintain the balance in the ecosystem, we need to have a balance between speciation and extinction. Neither the speciation rate can be very high nor the extinction rate can be very high. Both have to be in a very fine balance for ecosystem diversity to be maintained, for a balance in the ecosystem to be maintained. So that's why we have to understand that these two become very, very important. Now, when we talk about extinction, what we know is that over the history of life on Earth, more than 90% of all the species that ever lived on the Earth have already vanished. Probably the numbers are, as has been indicated here, would be more than 99%, maybe closer to 99%, that we are talking about the fact that most of the species that ever lived on the Earth have already vanished. But most of these have vanished due to natural reasons, and we'll have a discussion on this as well. And that brings me to a question, that do we need to worry about extinctions? Because the fact is that more than 99%, or maybe at least more than 90% of all the species that ever lived on Earth have already disappeared. So even if the species are disappearing now, is it something that we need to worry about? The answer is yes, we do need to worry about it. For now, you need to understand why we need to worry about extinction. And this basically comes from three questions. There are three stages of denial according to Edward Wilson. He had written this in his book, that there are three stages of denial for an individual when we talk about extinctions. And what are these three stages? The first stage is, why to worry about extinction when it's natural? And this is a question which is very worrisome to even answer. Because, and even if you talk about climate change, for example, you will come across people who will tell you that why do we need to worry about climate change? It is a natural process. You look at the history of the Earth and you will find that climate has been changing. There has been a hotter period, there has been a colder period, and this is a cycle that keeps on repeating. So there's nothing to worry about. And 40 years back, or maybe 50 years back, there was one year when it was as hot as it is today. And they'll give you all these facts so that they make you believe that climate change is not real. And something similar happens here as well. That when already there is a fact that more than 90% of the species already have vanished, so do we need to worry about the species being extinct now? The answer is yes. And why? So if we even say that, let's say that evolution is a natural process, when we talk about evolution, it is a natural process, and the replacement of species keeps on happening, but it keeps on happening at a given rate. For example, we have seen from the last mass extinction that the replacement that happened took approximately 10 million years. It took approximately 10 million years for the replacement to happen properly. At the same time, today we have a lot of artificial environment, and this means that the natural replacement that keeps on happening, that is done by the environment, that is done by the natural processes of the earth, that will not happen anymore. The nature will not be able to heal itself, because there is a lot of artificially created environment that we have today. So when we talk about the fact that it is natural, it can remain natural, it would have been natural if we had not come into the picture, if we did not start to intervene in the natural process of evolution. So that's why this becomes a troublesome question to even ask today, that why do we need to worry about it when it is natural? Then the second stage actually that he had talked about, and this also becomes a very relevant question today, that do we need so many species? And this is where you will be pointed out that there are so many bugs, so many insects, so many microbes. These are not required. These are not resources for us. So do we need all these? The answer again is yes. And we have talked about this in detail in the previous lectures itself. For example, when we talk about the importance of insects, why are insects important? Why are bugs important? We already have discussed it. So when if somebody says that we do not probably need all these species, we already have many species which are helpful for us, which are resources for us, others are not required. That's not the case. They have a big role to play in many of the things that happen on the surface of the earth. So that's why, do we need so many species? The answer again is yes, we need them. And then again, there's the third theory. Why do we need to save them? Just take them to a zoo, take them to a botanical garden, conserve them there, and then after that, once they have a good population, again reintroduce them in the wild. Things do not work in such a simple manner. If you just talk about the zoos and the botanical gardens that we have on the face of the earth, you'll probably see that maybe there are 4,000 to 5,000 species that will be able to save in this manner. But if you talk about all the bigger plants and animals that we have that can go to the zoo or the botanical gardens, then in that case you are looking at approximately 26,000 to maybe 30,000 such species. So out of 26,000 to 30,000 species, not more than 4,000 such species can be saved in this manner. So that again is not a solution. You cannot just say that if the population is going down, if something is getting extinct, just place it in a zoo, place it in a botanical garden, conserve it for some time, and then reintroduce it into the wild. That doesn't work out in that manner. The habitats would have changed, the animals will not be able to survive in all of a sudden a different habitat which have been introduced to them. So all these kind of things will never work. These three fundamental questions that people who think that we don't need to worry about extinction need to be addressed. So we have to worry about extinctions. We have to understand all the points which are important from the point of view of whether we need to save the species, why we need to save the species, and we have already had multiple discussions on this topic, that why biodiversity is important, why certain species are important and all that. So yes, we do need to worry about if the extinctions are happening.